So let's take a look to the content of chapter 3. What is then the expected output of chapter 3, or what are those things that you need to comply as part of chapter 3? So we have the chapter 3 is considered as the recipe of your research. Probably it will discuss the step-by-step process on how are you going to comply or say complete or say make into reality all your cited objectives, as well as everything you have placed in your chapter 1 and in your chapter 2. The chapter 2 would give you a entirety of the flow by defining or say citing some of the done researches that is related to the thing that you're going to create. So you're going to describe the steps you took to conduct your research or design your project. So how detailed should it be? That's what there is what we called as a step-by-step process. And then the reader should have enough information that he or she could replicate your research with the same or similar population and arrive at the same result. So that is then a simple overview. To introduce, you must have to do another statement of your purpose or objective, a paragraph, a one paragraph or a two paragraph, para not necessarily that the reader will go back to your chapter 1 and check what are those intended things that you're going to comply or say goal to achieve for your research. So if the reader is interested in your methodology, he or she does not have to go back and forth through chapter 1 to revisit the purpose and objectives. So you have to introduce in your chapter 3, you would prepare at least a paragraph, one paragraph that would give a description of what the research is all about. Expectedly as well, the operational framework, this is not the conceptual iba si conceptual from the operational framework. So the thing that you have presented in your proposal or in your title defense is an example of a conceptual framework. Now here is the operational framework. Operational framework refers to how or the flow of your system, the technicality of your system. Commonly, the operational framework will be in the form of a block diagram. So, back siya. If not a block diagram, you might also be using a flow chart with labels, of course. So, here we have a visual representation of steps to complete your research that explains the operational framework. So, what is then the operational framework? You're going to create now the visual representations of the steps on how to complete now your research. If not, construct a flow chart with labels. So when you say flow chart, that is then the step-by-step process of the computer or of the program as to how the system will be working. Make it a figure for your document. So meaning the operational framework in your chapter 3 should be labeled as one of the figures as well in your research. So follow APA style for formatting. Some of you did not follow APA. Some uses now IEEE formatting, which is not the format for the research. Anyway, if you're using Mendeley, and if you are going to switch now from one formatting to another formatting, you can just simply do it, by just clicking the option. I already discussed that in chapter 1, and I don't want to go back to that discussion, so please check the video that I prepared. Then be sure to have a narrative of your operational framework. In other words, your figure will not just a figure alone. You're going to explain as well the operational framework, and that is the narration or the narrative of your operational framework. Tell the reader what occurs at each step. So that means what each of the entity or say the square or the processes that you have placed in your framework. So it should be discussed, it should be explained, or say there are readers that are not satisfied with just a figure alone, and they would want an explanation of what a certain process is doing or what a certain say function is doing. So with that, you are going to explain that in the narrative part. So methodology, this is now the content of your research, of your chapter 3. When you say chapter 3, that explains the methodology. When you say methodology, that refers to the steps or the process of how are you going to complete your research. So that explains. So the specifics of methodology would include type of research, the design, the populations that the software will be using, the one that benefits the software, the sampling and the sample and the sampling, the sample size, the data gathering procedure, and the data analysis procedure. So this would involve now calculations on how are you going to validate and get the accuracy of your statistical methods, statistical tools apply in your research. So all research would always have research type, because the research type as well as the design will be the basis of the data analysis procedure that you're going to apply, and the statistical tools or methods that you are going to use to validate your research. So types of research projects. So these are the different or the common use type of research project. So we have descriptive, experimental, historical, qualitative, and project. So let us see what are the specific description of these types of research. So when you say design, I think this was not, we will have a separate discussion on the different types of research. But the one that was not, or that one that is not included here, not mentioned here, is the applied research. When, for your case, since you're going to solve a solution to a certain problem, commonly an IT or say a CS research would always fall to applied research. But descriptive, if you are going to assess now the impact or say the effectiveness of the software, so that where the research would follow. Experimental is if you are going to prove some changes, or if there will be a change from sample A or sample B. Common example of experimental researches are research that enhance the learning skills of the student. So probably your way of proving your research to that is there will be an experiment that will be conducted that you are going to assess the skills of the students prior to the event of the experiment. So they are going to get their score, and then once you expose them to the research or to your methods or to your solution, you're going to get again their score at the later part and see if there is a difference. So common statistical methods or say tools that applied in experimental is we have t-test and z-test. So yun yung mga experimental. There is a significant difference over class A or class B after a certain period of time exposed to the research. Historical, comparative, they're just the same. Qualitative, it's more of sentiments or say getting the feedback or say reactions of such. Ganun ang qualitative. We have project, curriculum design. So these are then a quick descriptions of those types of research or these types of research. So in terms of design, you have to put now the survey, your interrelationship studies, developmental studies, and experimental studies. Surveys that would be referring now to the recipient of your research. If it is a company, probably you will going to include now customers of the company, the management of the company, the employee of the company. Commonly, if you are going to tie up with a company, there will be three primary users of your systems to be developed. That is then, I have mentioned a while ago, you will have your customer, the management, the top management, and then the employee. So survey, so common survey research would also go with the school surveys, job analysis, documentary analysis, public opinion surveys, and community surveys. Then you have now the interrelationships. So when you say interrelationships, that is then the connections between A and B. So you have case studies, casual causal comparative, and then correlational studies. Correlational studies is what is then the relationship of your variable. So variable A and variable B na ba siya relationship. Commonly, we had a partial discussion of this in our linear regression, wherein we discuss now correlational of the features of the data sets, or the variables of the data set. Then developmental studies, we have growth studies, trend studies, model or system development. We will not go through this example because all of you have, it's either the descriptive, experimental, or applied. Then we have the experimental studies, through experimental design, the quasi-experimental design, the pre-experimental design. Then these are then the data gathering procedures. You would have the instrument development, the instrument description, the validity, reliability, how will you get the information, self-administered survey that can either be mailed, online, through using now Google Forms, ask in person, meaning you're going to interview the person, especially if you are using the qualitative type of research, then probably you will be doing some interview, or say a closed door, or say a conference interview. Ask over the phone. So the last two items commonly applied in a qualitative type of research. The validity and reliability of the say the statistical method that you have applied will depend on the tools as well that you will be using in your research. So you're going to check now the validity as well as the reliability. So in terms of interview, you can either have face-to-face, open-ended, follow-up na question. In terms of observations, you will have watching, listening, recording, non-participatory. So when you will be comparing two operations, especially comparing now the output of a algorithm, probably that would fall on the observation type. So instrument validation, that means your questionnaire, it's either you are adapting the online repositories of questions, or a certain author that the work of this author is already published, then that can either be possible as well. Or if you're going to say come up with your own, and they would call it as a mix na method, no? Meaning you does first the interviewing and the collections of the different items that would serve as the content of your questionnaire, and then you proceed with the validation part. So does the instrument measure the construct we intend to measure? So that means commonly here is you are going to check the listed objectives you have, and each objectives you cited in your chapter 1 should have an equivalent questions as well in your instrument. So is the instrument reliable? When you say reliable, is the questions you have placed in the instrument are published ba, or say you have reference of such? So if we retest the subject with the same instrument over a period of time with no treatment in between, will they respond the same? And then is there inter-item na reliability? That means the content of every questions is it been validated or checked, or say is there an item analysis of each of the questions you have included in your survey instrument. So when you say survey instrument or instrument validation, the content and the validity of your questions in your questionnaire. So is the instrument valid? So does it measure what you want it to measure? That's the reason why in the research in the research policy in the school, they would want that your questionnaire would pass through a certain validation, because these professionals will check now the connections or the relationship of all of the questions you have placed in your questionnaire, if it has a connection to the cited objectives or problems that you have had. So that's the meaning of the thing that is the instrument valid. One is there a professional that checks the content of your questionnaire? Second is that it measure what it want to measure, meaning does the question you have cited in your instrument, is it parallel or is it really addressed to the objectives you have cited in your chapter 1? So that's the thing. And then population, describe the subject of your study. What characteristic do they share that includes them in your population of interest? Will you include all members of the population in your study? So that is a census type. And then what is the total number of your N? So your N describes now the population. So there is also a formula in terms of the computation of the population. So in terms of the calculation of the sampling size, so the formula, there's also a formula that does that. Is the size or our population so big that a census is too costly, or will it take too much time? To sample the population, that can either be random, stratification, proportional, clusters, and purposive. So sample must be representative as well of the population. So these are the things that you're going to consider as well as to the populations that you are going to adapt or include or say applied in your research. Are you going to use random, stratification, proportional, clusters, and purposive? So response rate, how many participants responded to your survey? So early versus late respondents, respondent versus non-respondent. So that means the one that you have specified in your research that's really expected to answer your research, and those non-respondent, meaning that it's not this type of group is not part of the cited or of the expected respondents of your study. Controlling for non-response errors, so reporting of your response rate. Then data analysis and procedures. So these are now the statistical procedure. These are the statistical tools that you are going to use. So one of which is we have SPSS, or another you could also use the R programming to perform now the statistical procedure, especially if you are going to modify the say the model or say the structure of a certain calculation. So probably you're going to use now the R programming. So we have descriptive, inferential, qualitative, and then use of a specialized procedure. So specialized procedure, these are then data mining or say combining two algorithms to perform now the procedure. So that ends now the discussion of the chapter 3. So let us have some question and answer portion first before I proceed to another discussion.